In our last section, we'll talk about redistricting and gerrymandering. Now, every 10 years, the seats in the U.S. House of Representatives are reapportioned among the states based on population. Once the states know how many seats they get, new boundaries for the districts that the representatives represent in the state must be drawn to reflect shifts in population within that state. This process of redrawing boundaries is called redistricting. The 2021 apportionment, based on the 2020 census count of population, actually increased Oregon's seats in the House of Representatives from 5 seats to 6 seats. So not only did Oregon see a shift in terms of where their population was from some areas to other areas, but they had enough of an increase in population compared to other states that they received an extra seat in Congress. Because of that, it was important for Oregon's congressional district lines to be redrawn to allow from, instead of 5 districts, to allow for 6 districts. And they also have to draw that related to the population. So here are Oregon's 6 new districts. And one thing you'll notice about this picture is that the districts appear to be different sizes. Now, those different sizes really relate to area on the ground. It does not relate to population, because one of the important things for every congressional district is that they should have the same number of people within each district. And one of the things you can see in this picture is that some of these districts, to get the same number of people, include a lot of area, and some not very much area. Eastern Oregon tends to be a less populous area of the state. So District 2 has to include a lot of area to get the same number of people that, say, District 3, which is the Portland metro area, has to have. So the district in Portland, we have a denser population, so we get that number of people, that same number of people, into a smaller region. So you'll see this throughout different states in the country, that when they do the redistricting, the districts will have different sizes in terms of square miles, or in terms of area, but they will all have the same number of people within each district, or be really close to it, because of course people then continue to move around. The other thing that's important about redistricting is that the districts must be what we call contiguous. That means that they have to be, an individual district has to be connected. So you'll notice that in District 5 here, you have a lot of it in one kind of area to the west, and then there kind of snakes over and actually includes Bend, but it has to be connected. The part on the western side of the Cascades has to be connected to the part on the eastern side of the Cascades. It can't be separated. District 5 must entirely be connected to be a true district. Redistricting is very politically charged in most states. In fact, in over half the states, the maps are drawn by state legislatures. State legislatures are generally controlled by one political party, or at least one political party has a majority usually in a state legislature. And therefore, there's a tendency by the people in that party to draw maps that favor certain political outcomes in future elections. So we call this gerrymandering, the process of drawing district maps that favor the political interests of those in charge of the drawing process. In other words, make it more likely for candidates from their political party to win districts. One method used to recognize possible gerrymandering is to compare the proportion of seats a political party controls in a state with the proportion of voters with that party affiliation in the state. And I'm going to use North Carolina as an example, specifically in the years 2010 and 2012, to look at the results of the elections for House seats. Now, North Carolina in those 2 elections had 13 House seats. And in the election in 2010, they were using maps that had been drawn by a Democratic state legislature 10 years prior, or about 9 years prior. And in that 2010 election, 45% of the people voted for House candidates were voting for the Democratic candidate. And what you had was 7 of the 13 House seats elected to Democratic voter candidates. So 7 out of 13, when we do that proportion calculation, we get 54% of the members elected to the House were Democrats. So you had 45% of people voting for Democrats in the state, but 54% of the seats went to Democrats. Now, it is higher, but it is still pretty close to 50-50. You know, you're just under 50% with 45, you're just over 50% with 54. You can look at this the other way around if you want. Republicans, the state vote for Republican House candidates was 54%. 6 Republican House members were elected. If we divide that by 13, that was 46% of the House seats were elected to Republicans. So again, a little bit more than 50% of the people in North Carolina voted for Republicans, but only 46% of the seats went to Republicans. So you can see that it's a slight discrepancy there, but it's still fairly close. Again, it's just over 50 and then just under 50%. But it does seem like it's a little different. But let's take a look in 2 years later. In the intervening 2 years, we had a census and the Republicans were in charge of the state legislature and they redrew the maps in 2011. So when the election was held in 2012, we were using districts that had been drawn by the Republican Party, or at least the Republicans, I should say, in the state legislature. So in that 2012 election, 51% of the votes came from were for Democratic candidates. But only 4 of the 13 House seats went to Democratic candidates. 4 divided by 13 is actually only 31% of the seats went to Democrats. We went from 51% of the vote going to Democrats, but only 31% of the seats in Congress were elected Democrats for the state of North Carolina. So there was a big shift. The votes for Democratic candidates really hadn't changed that much. It actually had gone up between the 2 years, 45% to 51%. But the number of elected officials that were Democrats really went down, 54% to 31%. And you could look at it the other way around with the Republicans. 49% of the state was voting for Republican candidates, but the Republicans gained 9 seats in Congress. 9 out of 13 is 69% of the seats went to the Republicans. So even though less than half the state was voting for the Republican candidates, almost 70% of the seats went to Republican candidates. So there's this discrepancy here. And that difference in proportion of voters related to the proportion who are winning the seats is an indicator, because it's so different, that the way that the districts are drawn is influencing the outcome of the elections. We call this gerrymandering, when the district maps are drawn to try to have this happen, to have influence like this.